For our first panel discussion of the day, please welcome to the stage Columbia University master student Nina Shahverdyan, Teach for Armenia, Education in Emergencies Project Manager Ashot Gabrielyan, Director of Hub Artsakh Shoushan Keshishian, and Associate Director of the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, Margarita Baghdasaryan.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, Nina, Ashot, and Shoushan. I know the Institute truly appreciates it, and I'm sure so will the audience, as your first-hand experiences, both through the war and through the displacement and the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, should provide a layer of understanding to our audience that perhaps they have not had a chance to see and experience before. I'm going to start with a question that is often asked of me as well. Nina, when people ask you where you are from, where is your home, how do you answer?
Well, I've moved to New York several months ago, and since then it's been a problem to answer that because I try to say Artsakh and then explain, and I would say that nobody understands, or they understand, they can see physically on the map, and they can never understand what I feel when I talk about that. So for the past 2 months already, when somebody asks me where you're from, I just say I'm from Armenia and just stop talking because I don't feel like I can tell everyone how important it is where I'm from and how important it is for them to understand. So I just try to distance myself from my Artsakh background to not be hurt by their ignorance and lack of care about something that I care so deeply.
That's understandable. Ashot, I know that you're in Armenia now, having been displaced from Artsakh. How do you answer this question? I'm sure you also get this in Armenia very often.
Well, I firmly say I'm from Artsakh because that's where my identity is shaped, that's where my memories live, and that's where my whole life was. So saying that I'm from Artsakh is not only about claiming my birthplace, it's also asserting the truth that who I am and where I stand. And Artsakh for me is this feeling of comfort and loss for now, which I can feel very deeply, but I can't quite touch.
And Shoushan, you have been all over the world. You were born in Syria, you grew up in Lebanon, you moved to Armenia right before the 2020 war, and that's actually how Shoushan and I met. We were colleagues. And after the 2020 war, you made the choice to move to Artsakh. So as a diaspora and as a Spurkahai, you made this active choice to move there. And now you're sort of in this limbo place. What do you answer when people ask you that question?
It all depends on where I am, who's asking, and how much time I have to answer. I really don't know. Sometimes I say I'm from Syria, sometimes I say I'm from Lebanon. In Artsakh, I would say I'm Lebanese Armenian. In Armenia, they can tell from my accent that I'm Lebanese Armenian. When I'm abroad, again, it depends. Either I say Lebanon or Armenia. I don't know. It's all over the place, like you said.
In Armenia, do you ever say that you lived in Artsakh, and do people have a reaction to that? I'm curious if it's positive or negative.
I've never had any negative experiences, but I always mention that I've lived in Artsakh whenever I meet someone from Artsakh. It's the first thing I say. And then they definitely ask me where I lived, where my house was, and I say I was Evropin naprotiv divizit ashkum, which is what I learned how to describe it in Artsakh, so yeah.
We're going to move to a question that perhaps is a little difficult to answer, but I think it's important for our audience and for us to understand that for many might feel like the war is over, but for the people who lived through it, it has not really ended. So Nina, I want to ask you, and I think I want each of you to attempt to answer this question. How has the war not ended for you?
Yeah, I guess it's an important question. And also because for a lot of people, when they look at Artsakh people, they feel like, oh, they moved on, they live happily, they do fun stuff, and they study, they work, and they are over everything. But in reality, it hasn't been a single day where half of my thoughts and half of all my parents, family, friends' thoughts haven't been elsewhere. Every single day that I live, I hear things, I see things, and everything reminds me of where I come from, and everything reminds me of the horrors I've seen. All the sirens in this country, of the cars and the ambulance, every time I hear them, I catch myself thinking about all the sirens we had during the bombings that we had. And every single day when I walk and I see a tree that looks like a tree in my city, I'm like, oh my God, I feel so powerless right now because I didn't used to have that. I would travel, I would go places, and it would all look new to me, but nothing excites me anymore. It's a deep feeling of not caring about anything anymore, and also physically just knowing that the war actually continues inside Artsakh right now, where they are trying to destroy all our houses. And I know, and I've seen that the street where I grew up, it doesn't exist anymore, and there is only one house standing, our house. And every single day I wake up thinking, is my house there? And then pushing myself not to open the satellite images to see if it's there or no, because I know it's just a matter of time when it's not gonna be there. And with this, something very important will be lost forever. And for me, maybe also my hope to go back. So it's just an everyday struggle to keep myself. And not only about me, it's about everyone I know. And I'm sure Ashot will also talk about that. It's just, I don't know if there is a different kind of life after what happened. It just erased everything I was, and I experienced, and I loved, and made me into a new human being who doesn't have complex emotions anymore. I have just several very specific, very easy emotions, anger, hatred, and sometimes I get joy when I eat a tasty food, something or like that, but I don't get happy anymore at all, and I'm afraid that it's not gonna change, because, can I tell something more? I've met this woman who was displaced from Artsakh 30 years ago, and she lives in Tavush. I met her this August, and she was telling me that for 30 years that she's been living in Tavush, every time in her dreams, when she saw herself doing something in her house, she always, for 30 years, saw her Artsakh house, even though probably it's not there anymore, even though she has a new house, new family, everything new in Tavush for 30 years. For 30 years, she always saw her Artsakh home. So I feel like it's a destiny that is going to hunt each and every of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Ashot, how has the war not ended for you?
Well, in November 2020, I felt like I was living in a bubble, and that bubble just popped like that, and I feel like the war never ended for me after 2020. I remember my last memory of Artsakh was crossing over the Hakkari bridge, and I saw my aunt started praying, thanking the Lord that we are safe, we are alive. But that moment hit me very, very hard, because it felt like it's not just gratitude to the Lord, but it's also a farewell to our past. It was a farewell to the places we called home, and it was just, we were leaving behind all the life we had there. And that was the moment I realized that the war will never, ever end for us, because the physical conflict might not be there, but the real battles against trauma, loss, and fear are still very much alive. And as Nina said, it's a daily struggle to try to feel safe again and to bring normalcy to your life after everything we have lost. And now I work with children, and I truly believe these children carry the biggest trauma, and these kids actually mirror the experiences that a lot of Artsakhis went through. And it's not only about the struggles. The war lives on, and it lives on in our scars we bear, in our memories that surface randomly, and in the deep-seated fears we all carry with us.
Thank you, Ashot. Shoushan, how has the war not ended for you, perhaps in your work as well?
Which war?
You have lived through many, actually.
Because as I was listening to Ashot and Nina, I was thinking, I remember the Lebanese-Israeli war in 2006. And then in 2013, ISIS invaded my family's village in Syria, in Kesab. So my grandmother and my uncles were displaced. And then I remember the 2016 war in Artsakh when I was a university student, like organizing rallies at the Lebanese American University to get people talking about Artsakh. And then there was the first Beirut explosion, and after which I moved to Armenia, and then the Nagorno-Karabakh war. And then there was everything that happened last year. So war has always been part of my life. It's really shaped who I am, the values I have, and the work that I do. And especially since moving to Armenia in 2020, war has been a part of my life every single day. Everything that I do, all my work, my dreams, and everything is impacted by wanting to do something to address the impacts of war, whether it's in Artsakh or Armenia, now even in Lebanon.
Understandable. Thank you, Shoushan. Ashot, I want to bring it back to you and ask a little bit about your work with students in education. How does your role as an educator frame how you approach the displacement of Artsakhtsis? How does it impact your restarting and the students that you interact with on a daily basis?
Right now, I work with Teach for Armenia, and we work with displaced kids from Artsakh. And our goal is to create a safe space for these kids to feel more welcomed and to regain the happiness they have lost. And not to my surprise, but we did preliminary need assessment with these kids, and it showed us that these kids carry a range of traumas. And these traumas differ from unexpected cries to withdrawing so much from the society. They've developed a mutism. They don't talk to anyone. We have a kid in our group that lost 2 parents in the explosion. And we work with kids who lost parents, who lost friends. We have a kid who saw the death of his classmate during the war. And we work with this kind of traumas and with this kind of problems. These kids show the face of resilience for me, because seeing them to rebuild their lives, to restart with small but cautious steps, it just shows how resilient they are and how they are not giving up. And it's all about long run, having them in our groups and being there for them. And I feel like their healing journey just mirrors my own journey, and it just having the kids around and helping them to adapt to the new realities. But it's not very easy. Like after 1 year of work, we did another need assessment, and we still see that these kids feel like they are in these new communities not for a very long time. They feel like they are guests in these new communities, and they are not trying very hard to adapt to their new schools and communities. I think Shoushan will also talk about these kind of problems that we have in work with displaced people. But yeah, it's all about being there for each other and caring for each other and trying to be more empathetic towards each other.
Thank you, Ashot. Let's move to Shoushan, actually, since you brought that up. You're the director of Hub Artsakh, and you currently, although that wasn't the mission of the organization initially, currently your focus is the displaced people from Artsakh who are living in Armenia. In what ways are the international frameworks kind of shaping the way that you work, the labels that they use, perhaps the words that they do not use, because of the difficulty of the situation? Are these labels failing in your approach? Tell us a little bit about your work with Hub Artsakh.
Thank you. So before I answer the question, I want to give a bit of context about our work in Artsakh. We were based in Stepanakert. We had a co-working space, and we were also an NGO. Our focus while in Artsakh was to build the human capacity of Artsakh. And we had this really nice space in the center of Stepanakert where all of our paths crossed at one point or another. And since 2023, we were displaced as well. We left everything that belonged to us there, and we started again in Yerevan. And previously working in an unrecognized territory meant that we were isolated from this international humanitarian development machine. We had our own separate playbook. We had our own separate kind of network of partners, which were mostly Armenian foundations, whether local or international, including the USC Institute for Armenian Studies. And we had to kind of make our way like that. But now, being in Armenia, we're kind of thrust into this new context where we have to operate in this international system that, as you mentioned, uses these labels and terminology, and it's a different kind of guidebook for us. So, for example, one of the first problems, not problems, but things that we had to navigate, the first thing was the word refugee. Because for a while it was a debate. Are we refugees? Are we in a refugee-like situation? Are we forcefully displaced? Are we IDPs? How do you answer that? And while we were trying to advocate for people from Artsakh and we were trying to carve a space in these new communities for people from Artsakh, we were constantly trying to understand what it is that we identify as and what it is that the international community wants us to identify as. So right now the term being used in Armenia by the state and by international community is refugees. So we use that whenever we're working with our partners, donors, etc. But internally we don't use the word refugees. I think Nina and Ashot would agree with me. We try to use displaced. There's a lot of feeling attached with the word of refugee because it means that it has a sense of finality, yeah. It gives sort of a finality to it, which none of our community wants to accept. And we as Hub Artsakh, we don't want to accept that either. The second thing that we kind of grappled with is the word integration, because after the forced displacement, about a month or 2 months in, everyone was telling us you need to do projects for integration. People need to integrate. You need to work on socioeconomic integration, cultural integration, and this word was being thrown at us from every direction when people were still reeling from the shock of being forcefully displaced. And I understand that the intentions were good from everyone talking about integration because you want people to feel safe and comfortable and you want them to have a role in their new communities. But the way it was being done was so sharp and so difficult for us to navigate as well, because we want to speak the language of the international community because we have to operate in that space now. But at the same time, we're very cautious of how we present that to our community members. So it's always this line that we try to it's like a tightrope that we're trying to walk on at the moment, making sure that we're advocating for our community members in a way that is respectful and representative, while at the same time speaking the language of everyone that we are now able to work with. And one final thing is the word Artsakh itself, which by a lot of international donors is not accepted, is not recognized. We have to use Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the Russian and internationally recognized term. And whenever we write proposals, I always write Nagorno-Karabakh or NK in parentheses, and then at the end I do like a search and replace everything Artsakh, because I always, in the first few paragraphs, it's always Nagorno-Karabakh, and then I automatically switch to Artsakh. So things like these kind of bring a sense of erasure, like forced erasure, or as Nina mentioned earlier, kind of like the neglect or the lack of care, and we constantly have to grapple with it. So yeah.
Thank you, Shoushan. And I think even when it comes to the word Artsakh versus Nagorno-Karabakh, we also at the Institute kind of balance with that issue as well. We felt very confident when naming this conference Artsakh Uprooted, but we also know that so many of the non-Armenian community knows the conflict as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and it's always a balance of, well, how do we attract the people who don't know the name Artsakh, because we do want to educate them, we do want to be part of their learning process. So it's unfortunately a balance for us too, and I don't know if we've achieved the right balance yet, but thank you for sharing that. Nina, I want to move on to you, and a lot of people know you specifically because of your social media presence. Your Instagram handle, yours, Ninel, right? A lot of people assume her name is Ninel. It's not. it was kind of one of the few English language sources that was coming out of Artsakh almost on a regular basis during the blockade. And when there was a media silence, during the blockade especially, and throughout the conflict in general, international reporting has not been up to par in this conflict at all. Do you feel that the work that you were doing on social media, the awareness that you were trying to raise, was it effective? Do you think social media can be that source of information when there is no other information? What was your experience like?
Well, a lot have changed after that, because at that point during the blockade where there was literally nothing I could do to help the situation, it felt like, oh, I'm doing a good thing, I'm telling people about what's happening in Artsakh, and it's gonna help us if more people know about it, then better solutions will be offered to us. I really believe that the more people know, the more aware the world is about Artsakh, the more justice we'll have, but it's just simply not true. And I mean, after everything that's happening in Gaza right now that I see, the whole world knows that there's genocide, but it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help people, they are still dying there. And now that I think about that, even if everybody knew what was happening in Artsakh, it wouldn't have helped. So I just lost hope in everything that I used to do. And I feel very hurt and very sad because I was lied to, because when I was going to university, we were learning that there is this concept of democracy, human rights, peace building, and all these things matter to the world. But then it was the turn for Artsakh people to be cared about, to be protected by all these international laws. When actually there are so many suffering people right now, the international laws don't work because they obey those who have power. So I just don't think that even right now when I do post sometimes, I'm like, why am I even doing it? It's not gonna help. The only thing that I learned that can help us is to make our country stronger, really stronger, and then to enforce our opinions on others, because just the way world operates, the way we see how it operates right now, over and over again, it doesn't give me much hope.
Thank you, Nina. Ashot, I want to come back to you and specifically ask about the children that you work with. You already shared a lot with us. I'm wondering, how are the kids able to balance kind of this need to integrate? You mentioned that there is a resistance, and maybe integrate isn't the correct word, while maintaining a sense of community. A lot of the displaced have been kind of spread all over the country. Families, friends who used to, spend every day together are now, somebody might be in Gyumri, the other one might be in Jirashen or wherever. Can you please talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think Shoushan said it very well. Integration is not the specific word we use. It's more of an adaptation, because Armenia is not a new country to us. Armenia is our homeland, and we don't really need to get integrated in Armenia, but we need to adapt to the new communities we have. So the kids have specific difficulties in this because they don't really want to, because they feel like they're there not for a long run and they want to return. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think we also need to talk about the right of return. But another problem there is that these communities move a lot. So in just 1 year, we worked with 1,500 kids, and the next year, this year, when we started working, we couldn't track a lot of them because the communities move from one community to another community, and there is no specific place where they can develop a sense of belonging or sense of having a safe space. They just move from one place to another place because they don't truly feel supported economic-wise. So they are trying to find a new home, trying to find another place. And these communities, the host communities, they were mostly not ready to welcome this much of people from Artsakh, and there is a specific wording you need to use while working with these specific kids, with kids who have traumas, and these communities didn't really have that capacity at first. So instead of helping them, some communities, some schools deepened the traumas of these kids, not intentionally, but it just happened so. Another problem in this regard is the persistent gaps in knowledge of these kids, because they actually skipped a lot of school during the blockade and during the war, and there is a huge work to be done academic-wise. We are now helping them through remedial classes and catch-up classes, so they can catch up with their new classmates and try to adapt to the new educational system. And to be honest, the educational system is a bit different from the one we had in Artsakh in terms of like textbooks, in terms of like the whole educational system. So they also have this kind of trouble there as well. And all these small problems come up to this huge one. As I said, these kids still feel like guests in these new communities. So they don't really do much to adapt, and that's where we work right now. And we have this specific culture in dialect, our culture, our traditions that we also need to kind of preserve. And now we work with these kids towards this kind of adaptation as well. We work with them through change-based learning, helping them to develop new community projects, showing their new classmates the culture of Artsakh, the dialect of Artsakh, and trying to talk about Artsakh as much as possible so their new classmates, their new teachers get to know the real them.
Thank you, Ashot. Shoushan, I want to kind of reflect a little bit on the title of our panel, which is Restarting Again. And I want to ask you, what does restarting mean for you, and specifically in the context of the work that you do with Hub Artsakh? What is restarting like for them?
That's a very difficult question. When we first, after displacement in October, we had a big event that we wanted to prepare for, so we decided the best way to tell about our work is to create a magazine. And we knew that we wanted to call the magazine something related to what you just said, restarting, rebuilding, reinitiating, recreating. And we weren't sure what the verb should be, but we knew that it was a re. So the name of our magazine now is just Re, and there's a blank, and under the blank it says fill in the blank. Because we try to capture so many experiences and so many different encounters with displacement, because we have in our community, in our beneficiaries, people who have been displaced. This is their third displacement. We have people who've been displaced and then gone back and then displaced again. And restarting for our community is so different. There's not just one universal experience for it. And what we try to do as Hub Artsakh is to carve space, to make space for people to live their own experience, share about their experiences, and just provide a platform for them to rebuild their lives in Armenia, try to guide them through it. As an NGO, we had to redo our entire strategy. We had to figure out what it is that we're going to do now in Armenia. How are we going to continue to serve in these new circumstances? And it's a matter of continuously figuring out what it is that needs to be done, and always being able to do the work of thinking and then rethinking and designing and redesigning. And I think that applies both professionally as an NGO, as an institution, but also for our community members.
Thank you, Shoushan. And we have 1 minute, so I'm going to present this question to Nina. If there is sort of one thing that you would like our guests to leave with today, what would your message be today?
Maybe I want to share my last memory, and that's something that I think about all the time, and it's something I want you to think about. During the blockade, especially during the last month, there was really no food or anything. We didn't have anything. And when the war happened, before everybody became displaced, there was this moment where nobody talks about it, but there was this moment that the blockaded community, for us, Stepanakert, where I am from, started hosting the displaced people from other parts of Artsakh that were attacked and occupied by Azerbaijan. And then suddenly I really lived like 1 minute away from the main square, and that's the place where all the displaced people would be left. And suddenly I just saw so many people without clothes, without food, without anything, any place to be, without their passports with them, because they were just taken away from their houses by Russians and put in the square. And it was dark, the night was coming, and and already like people were starting to get displaced, like they had to leave their homes, the road opened, and these people were hungry, and we had to give them food, but there was none. We didn't have for ourselves. And I remember at night I saw this family with like 7 children standing there alone, and I asked them, where are you gonna sleep? And they said, we don't have a place to sleep here, because it was a mess. Everybody was leaving. It was right after the war. It was not nothing was operating anymore, and they were standing there not knowing how they are gonna spend the night. And at that moment and after that, I always felt the feeling of antirutsun. I don't know the right word for that in English. It's maybe abandonment.
I think abandonment is correct.
But in Armenian, it hits differently, because all your life you are believed that you are taken care of by your government, by your country, but by Mother Armenia. And at that moment when I saw them, and all these people who really didn't have anything left on earth, I felt like all the systems we believed in, it all collapsed, because here they were with so many children without place to stay, without food. And I went home and I asked Mom, can I give them something? And she gave me coats and nothing else, because we didn't really have any food. We placed them somewhere to sleep for that night, but it's just one family and so many, many more. And I don't know, I feel like something I want you to think about right now is that so many people still feel that there is nobody who cares for them, because everything that we had, it collapsed. It isn't there anymore. All the beliefs that we have collapsed. And even inside Armenia, no matter how much we love our homeland, we don't feel like we're cared about. We don't feel like Artsakh is cared about, and we don't feel like anybody works for us to go back home. Like, we should address the fact that we really want to do everything, and we believe that it's possible, but we need to talk more about our rights of return, and we need to talk more about our just general rights for property and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. That's it for our time today. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you all for listening, and we hope that these personal stories have added to your understanding.